Welcome to the Center for U.S. War Veterans Oral Histories at the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey in Seagirt, a partner of the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. Today is September 30th, 2015. I am Carol Fowler, Director of the Center. My honored veteran today is Terrence J. Fearon, who served with United States Navy Seabees in the Vietnam War. He served from May of 1966 until May of 1971 and was with Naval Reserve Elizabeth, New Jersey, and also was in Davisville, Rhode Island, and Chu Lai, Vietnam, the MCB-6 heavy equipment. Thank you for wanting to be here today. Can I call you Terry?
Yes.
Your eyewitness account is considered a primary historical source and a valuable contribution to the Veteran Oral History Project here at the National Guard Militia Museum. And good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Had anyone in your family, Terry, served before you?
No.
Okay. So how did you come to be in the service?
Well, when we were in high school, I graduated high school in '64, and the Vietnam War was gearing up, and they were taking, they actually took 2 busloads of us over to Plainfield, New Jersey for induction ceremony, just to physicals. And we were told once you passed a physical, you were going to be inducted by the draft and go to Vietnam. That was, I had orders to go to the Army in December 7th of 1965. But at that time they were killing a lot of people every week. And
What do you mean?
Well, as they geared up the war, the bad guys in Vietnam started to kill more.
Okay.
And then that led me to seek more training because we were told you go to Fort Dix for 3 months and then they drop you into Vietnam. And I felt sorry for a lot of those guys that didn't get a lot of training.
Right.
Yeah, so that helped me get over to the Seabees to get more training. And I thought if we're better trained...
How did you end up with the Seabees, though?
Well, actually, I had a friend of mine's father was a captain in the Navy, and he suggested we go and enlist in the Navy. So we did that into Naval Reserve Center on Front Street in Elizabeth. And when we went in, there were a recruiter there for the Seabees and asked if anybody had heavy equipment experience. And I grew up on a horse farm in the Watchung Reservation, so I had experience with different types of heavy equipment. So they were looking for heavy equipment operators to construct the infrastructure of war. And that's how I entered the Seabees.
You had worked as a construction worker?
Yes, for probably 4 years during high school and then about a year after high school. And if you had I probably had 4 years of different type of equipment. So that gave me a leg up into the Seabees heavy equipment.
So that was a unit in the Seabees?
Yes, MCB-6. I was attached to ComCB Lant in Davisville, Rhode Island, and that was 21st Naval Constructionman Regiment in Davisville, and went through Class A school training there for heavy equipment. Bulldozers, cranes, road graders, earth movers, all heavy construction equipment, site work.
Is that the first place that the Seabees sent you?
Yes.
What kind of adjustment was it for you to go from civilian to military life?
Well, in training it was interesting, and the drums of war were beating and we were patriotic and we ran to it.
Okay. And can you describe a typical day in Davisville?
Oh, it started early. You'd have reveille 5 a.m. and then you'd have chow hall and then you're bussed over to a school. And I think we went through about 6 months of schooling and practical application work with the heavy equipment. So the day lasted till about 6 o'clock at night by that time. think we were 6 days a week also because they were gearing the war up and they needed Seabees to build the infrastructure.
So, can you just go back a minute? Naval Reserve, you wrote down Elizabeth, New Jersey?
Yes, there's on Front Street in Elizabeth, New Jersey, there's a Naval Reserve Center that you can enlist into the Navy.
Okay.
I forget the actual, I don't even know if it's still there. This was in 1965, I think it is.
Okay, sounds right. What was the mood of the country at the time?
Well, it was upbeat, and people were, I think, wrestling with the problem of, okay, was the government was portraying we had to go stop communism over there in this little country, and, of course, we had just left Korea and trying to stop communism there, so then they were going to do that. But I think we were young, and we didn't really understand the whole concept of what was coming on there. I think the average age of a soldier in World War II was something like 25, and Korea was 22 to 23, and Vietnam it was like 18 to 19.
Kids, yeah.
So,
In fact, that reminds me, this picture looks like a lot of kids.
oh yeah, that's
Little
right.
kids.
We went through boot camp in Great Lakes, and you can see we were all very young.
Was this after Rhode Island?
No, this is before.
Oh, okay.
We were on a fast track to get us into our jobs and get us over to Vietnam. But that was your basic training was the first thing they did when you mustered in.
And then after Davisville, you went to July?
Yes. Actually, I was attached to MCB 6, Mobile Construction Battalion 6. And they were already in Vietnam, so they gave me extra training because they had me earmarked to be part of the advance party for the second tour to Vietnam. That was in the fine print when we signed up for Seabees, is that you went twice, 2 tours to Vietnam.
You had 2 tours?
Well, I only went 1 tour because they de-escalated the war when they cut Seabees strength by about 80% in 1968 when we came back.
Wow.
And that's when we knew that they were just going to not pull out, but it was going to be a mop-up operation after that, because we built everything that was the immediate need in war.
Oh, okay. And where was this picture taken?
That picture was taken in Davisville outside the one schoolroom for the Class A school. All the trades in construction were schooled in Davisville. Plumbers, carpenters, builders, electricians, linemen. We actually would drop us in, we'd build you a whole town from just a bare piece of ground.
Oh, okay. And your specific MOS was working the heavy equipment?
Yes, heavy equipment, any heavy piece of equipment. There were 2 different types of equipment operators. I was the EO. I wore a little bulldozer on my arm. That was my rate. And there were other equipment operators that were assigned for trucks and lighter equipment, but I was called EOH, which is heavy.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. What were your first impressions landing in July? Wait, where did you land?
Well, we took off from Quonset Point, which was where the Seabees were actually born, and they split Quonset into Quonset and Davisville and gave Davisville the home of the Seabees. We took off from Quonset Point in a C-131 or 41 Starlifter, and they took us over through Alaska and then dropped us into Saigon.
What were your first impressions when you got off the aircraft?
Well, we all got out to make a head call, and when we went in, there was a men's room and a ladies' room, and when you went in there was just one room. There was no divider between the ladies' room and the men's room. So it was like your first indication that something was different from where you came from. And then they put us on, they split us up into different areas because I wasn't with my battalion. We were fragments of other battalions. So I think there was about maybe 30 of us that were going to MCB-6 in July. And they put us on a C-130 transport plane and took us up to July. But that plane didn't have any seats in it, so we were sitting on the deck and just holding on to webbing. And it had no doors, I remember. And July was across from, July was on the sea, about 60 miles south of Da Nang. And the runway would take, it was very large, like Newark Airport length runway. But there was a mountain area to the west of it where the VC would sit on top of it and try to shoot the planes down with rockets or send mortars onto the runway. So when we were landing, we got there at night, and when we were landing, the plane had to do a few loop-de-loops because they were trying to shoot us down, and over the loudspeaker comes, "Welcome to the war, boys."
So that was your baptism by fire?
Yeah.
And you're hanging onto webbing and the doors are open? How long was the flight?
I can't remember that. I think Saigon's a long way down, but I don't know how fast that plane goes. You know, it's not like the C-141 or 31, that's like 500-600 miles an hour. But the C-130, I think, is a workhorse.
So the Marines at Chulai, they weren't launching and recovering, they didn't have to recover your plane with the wire, the cable? Your plane just landed itself?
Oh, yeah. That was a regular runway like you would see when you took off from Newark Airport or Philly Airport. It would take a C-141, was in those days was the biggest plane. It had 4 jet engines on it. I think there was maybe might have been 100 and some odd CBs on the plane, all going to different detachments in Vietnam.
And what were the living arrangements there for you?
We had, in main camp, Chulai was our main camp. We had huts that we built. They had plywood floor. It was up about maybe 2 feet. It was up 2 to 3 steps because of water and snakes. And then it had plywood sides up halfway and then screen. And then we put 4x8 pieces of plywood to drop down when the monsoons came, and it had tin roofs. And then we put sandbags on top of the roof so the weather wouldn't blow them off, or if we, the gooks were shooting a rocket and it wouldn't blow your roof off if it didn't land too close.
Mm-hmm. Did that ever happen to you?
Well, we were, Chulai was a huge base, and it was a main staging area for the war. It was the engine of war, which impressed me. And when the VC would sit across Route 1 up on this mountain range there, it wasn't really mountains, but large hills, and they would constantly be sending some sort of an armament toward Chulai. So sometimes your end would get hit, and sometimes down by the airport. We were about a quarter of a mile away from the airport. They didn't have deep water ports there. They had what was called sand ramps, and I think it's the LSTs would bring in the different supplies for the war effort there. And we would load them, that's where you take the large rough terrain forklifts. You would go into the belly of the ship and bring out the bombs or whatever supplies were being delivered at that time, and then load them onto trucks, and then someone would take them down to the proper different camps.
So how long were you in Chulai?
I think it was like 7 to 8 months, because I was a little slow. They gave me extra training, and my group was already there. My battalion was already there.
So what year was that?
That was
60?
67 to 68. Most people remember they all call it the Tet, because Tet of 68 was the high point of the war. And it's actually, Tet is a yearly celebration for the Vietnamese, but the Tet that everybody speaks about is the 68 Tet. The problem there, and it was well documented by 60 Minutes, showed that the general that was in charge, General Westmoreland, well, let me back up. In early 68, they stopped bombing Hanoi for humanitarian reasons, which is an oxymoron. So when they stopped bombing Hanoi, they were bombing the factories that were building all the stuff they were sending down into South Vietnam. When they stopped bombing Hanoi, the Russians and the Chinese were able to give them much more things, and then the Gooks would bring it down on elephants down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So that buildup was happening, and they were storing all this armament and weapons, and that's why Tet of 68 was such a mega event. It was kind of like the finale of the fireworks. When you see a fireworks display, you see a little boom, and then this goes off and that goes off. But the finale is a constant armament display. That's what was Tet of 68 was. The practical problem was, and they proved this because General Westmoreland apparently sued 60 Minutes and lost because his aides had turned against him. Apparently his aides, military aides, were telling him all this armament is coming down the trail, and I guess maybe his thought was we were going to have one large war. But the practical problem was he never told us. So when the S hit the fan, we wonder where did all this come from? And a lot of guys weren't as prepared as they should be, let's say.
So he probably told Washington but didn't tell you.
Yeah.
That's
At that
awful.
time, I think the politicians were then trying to run the war. And that's where
But-
ultimately they put the onus on the veterans that we were the ones that lost the war. But I'd have to disagree with that.
So you witnessed Tet from where you were?
Yes, I was there during Tet. They actually, one of the things they were going to have, I think it was during Tet, they were going to have a show of force. They were going to have like a 300 truck convoy run from Da Nang to Saigon all along Route 1. And they dispatched us to we didn't know it at the time, but it was a artillery base. And we brought, myself with a low bed trailer with a heavy bulldozer on it. In case the Gooks blew the road up, we were prepared to go out and repair the road so this convoy, a show of force, could continue on. But as night fell, we were sitting under a battery of 175 howitzers. And when they shot that off, we didn't know which way they were coming. But then they told us that, and I said, well, blow a horn when you're gonna, give us some kind of warning, because I guess they were up high around this hill and we were down low, ready to go out onto the road. But it's kind of startling when they go off. Yeah.
And you feel like you're in the line of fire?
Yeah. It's, when there's so much going on, and especially when you're running a heavy piece of equipment, you can't really tell which way things are coming. So a lot of times when you be operating a large piece of equipment, you're really not in the know of what's happening. So you just do your job.
What about, did you have radio contact?
No, we didn't really have radios. The only radios we had in those days were those patch telephones where you had to ring that up and then the operator would patch you to your division or something. But I think like our chiefs, each company had a first-class petty officer and then a chief petty officer that was in charge of the company, and then they would have the different projects we were doing. We had probably 10 different projects in the Chu Lai area and surrounding area that was going on a constant basis. We worked 6.5 days a week. Probably, I'd say a good 12 hours a day. and that was for the war effort. There's in my project book from Vietnam, it's got a list of the different projects. We built bomb dumps for the airport, and then we built storage tanks for the jet fuel and fuel oil that would be delivered. We built hospitals. We added a runway to the Chu Lai runway, and we have a picture of the jets landing and taking off on the runway next to us while we're pouring concrete with wheelbarrows. And whenever we see the planes, we'd always just kind of go, just stay on your own side. Mm-hmm. So it was an experience. We were young and, highly trained, heavily armed, and full of vim and vigor, patriotism. And never thought about the consequences. It was always, we were so focused on the job. It was when you would see our heavy equipment yard, we were in the north end of Chu Lai, and the heavy equipment yard was next to where the choppers would bring the body bags in, and then the grade detail would take them on weapons carriers. They would land, I think it was before dawn each day we arrived. When we were in main camp, we arrived at that yard, and then were taken to our projects by bus or truck. And you would see the body bags of our men coming in.
Mm-hmm. Did any of these who you served with?
No,
Not
actually,
make it home?
I haven't. It's kind of interesting. In all these years, I've never come across another member of my branch, and very few Seabees. I don't know the exact number of how many we were in Vietnam, but
What about from your high school?
there are, I think, about maybe 5 veterans from the high school that I see. 2 died already. One of my, I was born at Overlook Hospital in Summit, New Jersey, and 5 minutes apart from James Gutierrez, who we were buddies all the way up through school, and we both went to Vietnam, and he went into Tank Corps for armament, and he died in, I think, February of '68.
What happened?
They never recovered his body, but they found the tank was destroyed. So they don't know if he was captured or destroyed. So they always list him as KIA, but they don't know how. Actually, there was a gas station in Summit that as kids we all hung around when we got our license. He was good friends with a guy that was about maybe 5 years older than us, and he kept a little plaque on the wall.
With James' name on it?
Yeah. The only way I knew that he was killed was that there was a newspaper, the Summit Herald, and my father sent it over to me in Vietnam.
Oh.
Yeah. Other than that, I didn't know.
Must have been horrible to get that news.
Yeah, it's something that's close to you. They also, when I got to Vietnam, we were on helicopters and going to a job. They would have the heavy equipment delivered, and then they take us in helicopters and bring us in rather than have us sitting out in the field with them. So one of my trainers, he was a first-class petty officer, Gastineau. He was killed on the chopper in front of me, so when the choppers landed at the job and we saw him being taken out in a body bag, that was your first indication of the cost of war. And then we would see, because we'd be on the different jobs and interacting with Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and you'd see the gooks coming with they put sandbags over their head and tied their hands behind their backs to their feet. And you'd see, the body bags are our guys. We were welcomed in. We welcomed in everybody's camp because we were there to build them something. It's the Army doesn't like the Navy, doesn't like the Air Force, don't like the Marines, etc. But everybody liked us because we were going to build you something, either a road or build you, barracks or something. So people always remember when they travel, when they see me as a CP. Oh, you guys built this for us. So the volunteer work I do now for veterans, that helps me speak with people because they know that I'm there to help them.
Of course.
Yeah.
We should talk about your T-shirt that you have on.
This is the insignia of the CBs.
We build, we fight, can do.
That's our motto. Our chant was, nothing is impossible, it just takes me a little longer. And that helped me become successful in business after I came back from Vietnam, because we had all that intense military training, but we also had intense construction training. So it's why today I still give back by volunteering and assisting Gold Star mothers and families and veterans. I just did the Run for the Fallen. We did that for 5 days here for the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. I want to make sure we want to make sure that they don't get treated like we were treated.
Are you ready to talk about when you left Vietnam?
Yeah, it was, I guess that was a happy thing, it's like mixed emotions because you're leaving and, another group is coming in, and construction is just an ongoing project all the time, never really stops. It just morphs into different events, so. And then when you're leaving, you're saying, well, I'm happy to get on the plane, it's my turn to leave, but then you're saying, we left guys there, we should be with them to stay. And but then you knew you were going to go back for a second tour, so.
At the time, you
Yeah.
thought so.
I found that out about a month into my tour in Vietnam because I was put in with, in a hut with 10, I think there were 12 of us in these huts. And they kept talking about, yeah, last time we were here we did this, and last time we did that, and I tell you, what did it mean? They started laughing. Said, you never read the fine print either, huh? Two tours.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. But,
How'd that make you feel?
well, it's too late. It's like you jump out of the plane, parachute, and you hope it opens because it's too late to worry if it don't.
Right, true.
Yeah. So, but, so we were supposed to go back and then re-equip ourselves, get some rest, and I guess it was probably 4 to 5 months we would turn back to Vietnam. That's what we were slated to do. So they, actually I think we went back civilian aircraft. They flew us, which, because we were expensive. It cost the government a lot to train us and keep us. So they flew us, I think we went back, I forget the name of the airlines, one of the main airlines. But they dropped us into, back to Quonset Point, I think around 3 o'clock in the morning. And I never forget there were protesters at the time.
Oh.
Yeah. And yeah, even on the base, somehow they got on the base.
Wow.
Because those days the bases aren't, we didn't have terrorist things, so the bases
Right.
were open. So, and there weren't many of them. There were a couple of them whether they were children of people on the base or something. But in those days, this is, May of '68, and that's when you were getting the Students Against the War, and this stuff was all coming on television. The body count was every week. They put it up and every day, So people were starting to turn against the war at the time, I think. And it was something that, my experience in Vietnam was the people didn't want us there. The Vietnamese didn't want us there. You have the whole North Vietnamese people didn't want you there. And then the poor Vietnamese, South Vietnamese were caught in the middle.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, when we started getting reports from the people demonstrating back home that they didn't want us here, and was thinking, well, what the hell are we doing here,
You mentioned earlier that you left with such a patriotic sense of fighting the spread of communism.
Yeah, I guess it's something that carried on from, World War II was the war, and
Fidel Castro was more your era.
Yeah, it's something that, I guess now as I age, I guess I'm 68, and you age and you're able to understand things a little more, whose way of life is better, whose religion is better, that whole philosophical argument comes into play. When you oppress people, okay, somebody should help. I think we actually thought we were helping. But when it turned out that when you go into somebody's neighborhood and try to kick them out of their homeland, it's very difficult to do that because they fight with more of an intensity. It's like somebody coming into your house and trying to take over your house while you're still living there. There's a difference in the tenacity of that, as we can see now over in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Good point.
But when we came back, we landed there, and then my dad was there, and he brought me back home. And I guess it was a Saturday morning. So I slept for about an hour. I couldn't believe I was home.
Oh.
Yeah. So I walked up into town, and you kind of just like poof. You drop back in.
Right.
I think what they do today, I'm told they have a debriefing week or something with the folks that come back from war now, where us, it was just like, one day you're there and the next day you're back here and everybody's having a good time. Nothing seems like it changed here.
Life went on while you were gone.
Yeah, so that was a little difficult. And I was there in Summit at 12 o'clock. They blow the fire siren to announce noon. And when that went off, I ducked into a doorway, and people had no idea.
Mm-hmm. The effect.
Yeah. So it's, to this day, it still sounds, always kept you alive, and I need to know sounds all around me, and it doesn't leave. But
What about sights, like when you're on the Parkway and you drive by that certain area that almost is like the Mekong Delta?
oh yeah, you have flashbacks, or what they call that, and you'll see something, or I'll see a construction site similar to something that we did, or we were heavy construction hard. So when you drive down the Parkway and you see different areas and whatnot, right away I can say, geez, I was on this job doing this.
Mm-hmm.
We had our own quarry in Vietnam, and we had our own rock crusher. So we had a very large operation. One thing about the quarry in Chu Lai was they would shoot the rock. They would drill all night. From noon, they would drill all night and load it with C4. And then they would blow that at noon. So they would stop traffic on Route 1. They would stop the traffic because, in those days there were no safety things. So they'd blow rocks 1,000 feet, you'd have rocks flying. They didn't have those big mats that they put them on. So they would blow a horn, and then they'd fire the rock, and then That was my first job when I got to Vietnam, was they put me on night crew. And I looked at them, I said, well, don't they play war at night? And they said, yeah, but we work. So in Chu Lai, there was a rock crusher, but you would take an earth mover and go out through the gate and go up halfway up the side of that hill that was west of Chu Lai base, and you would get the shot rock all night long and come back and put it in, dump it into the rock crusher. And every time we drove out the gate of the base to cross Route 1, the Marines would salute us because there was nobody out there except the guy that was loading the trucks and somebody guarding him. And when you got up there halfway up that hill, I don't know if they were probably maybe 1,800 feet high, something like that. But when you got halfway up the hill in where the shot rock was, you backed the earth mover up, getting ready to load, and you'd look back, and here was the entire front of Chu Lai base, probably a mile long, all aimed at you. And it just seemed crazy.
And you just hope that people got the word that you're out there?
Well, they knew we were there, but, you know, if we were ever attacked, it must have been that the VC wanted some crushed stone because it never really bothered us much. But when you go in and out of the gate, the Marines couldn't believe that we were going out of the gate and everybody is all safe and secure here. And I don't know, that's what they told us to do, so we did.
How did you stay safe as far as from the rocks flying all over?
Well, when they shot that, you know, you still have quarries around in country now, so what they do is they have these large heavy steel mats they put on. So you just get a boom and the mat will come up a little bit. Plus they have much more safety regulations. Our thing was, they were Seabees that were in the quarry, so the game was how many holes could they drill in that time frame, and then how much C4 could they pack into it to blow and make the rocks as small as they could make to get into the rock crusher. I'm sure now they have certain requirements where you can only put so much explosive into the holes, but in those days we didn't really have that. And it was like, that was their objective, to see how far they could blow the rocks. But we were doing our job. Mm-hmm. I forget how many thousands of tons of rocks that we went through the rock crusher, and then we built Route 1 with. Some parts of Route 1 were just a one-lane road over the top of the rice paddy.
Speaking of rice paddy, let's go back to that story where you ran across the dam of the rice paddy with the camera?
Well, similar to when you stop, when you cut a hole through a road here in the States, all of a sudden traffic has to stop or be detoured. In Vietnam, Route 1 would go across the rice paddies. There were no roads on the side of that. So whenever we would install these culverts, similar to what happens here, to equalize the water pressure on both sides of Route 1, especially for monsoons, when we build the road across the monsoon, and if you got too much water on one side, that water would just break it through, and you'd have to rebuild the road. So hence, we would go in certain points, our engineers would tell us, okay, go to this marker and put in a culvert, because we need to have that water equalized. So one day we go out with a 30-ton bulldozer, and we've got about 10 dump trucks full of heavy crushed stone. And we would take the bulldozer and cut a hole right through across the road. And I think the one that we did there was about maybe 6 feet deep. So when we do this, you stop all the Vietnamese traffic. Now Vietnamese traffic was, some had trucks, some had those little Iacetta buses they'd pack 10 people into things, and a lot of other people were just walking. So what happens when you do that? Well, the people on the buses and stuff and the trucks, they have to stop until we're done with our job, but all the people that are walking, or people that got out of those trucks and buses, can walk around on the rice paddy. There's little dams between rice paddies, and you can walk on them. So as we're looking at this, it's like you're in the middle of this, and all of a sudden you realize there's probably like 500 Vietnamese all around you, coming both ways. Some people were coming south, some were coming north.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, so, and you don't know who's who. So as this happened, I said, here's another crazy thing. I always carried a little slide camera in a holster. And it was a little 110 Kodak camera. But it was easy. I could pick it up and just snap a picture. So I asked a couple of guys, I said, look, we got to get a picture of this. So I asked them, I said, cover me with your weapons. I'm going to run out on the one dam. I said, I got to get a picture back with these people all running around us and the big hole cut in the road. And thus you'll see like 6 or 8 dump trucks full of stuff and the hole there and the culvert is ready to go in. I said, before we do this, we got to get a picture. I don't know if anybody ever took pictures of that, but that was one where you're probably 10 miles in the middle of nowhere on Route 1, and now you have 500 of whoever is all around you like ants, and the rice paddy dams weren't all in one way, so they were all like a matrix. So they would be running around through, some people running through the rice paddy, they're all screaming and yelling at us because we're bothering their journey on Route 1. So there were instances like that where we found ourselves in the middle of nowhere with doing our job, whatever the little project was we were doing, and all of a sudden people would appear, and so we would have to guard ourselves from them. That's why we were trained so well. So the one picture I had there was another one where I had the bulldozer off the low bed trailer, and there's about 6 of us. We had a small job to do. A lot of times on Route 1 there was no place to turn around. So what we would do, we'd bring dump trucks full of heavy shot rock and make a turnaround place in case a tank was coming up the road and the truck coming down, you had to have a place to turn around. So they do the same thing along your major highways. So this day we're doing one of those, and all of a sudden these 3 gooks appeared just on the back of, here they are. Well, you don't know who they are, or is there more of them? So I told the guys, hey, you got to get a picture of this. People won't believe it, So, and here's 2 guys had their guns trained on these 3 guys, and I jumped up on the thing and I said, take our picture. So, but we did a lot of work with Marines. We were well respected by Marines because a lot of times we would build what they were going to use literally the next day. Or I know there was another instance when we cut a hole in the road, and we figured we were okay, and there wasn't much gook traffic, and we had that, and we're all ready, so we cut the hole, and we said, okay, it's time for a coffee break or a beer break. And so there's I don't know, about 20 of us doing this job, and all of a sudden we hear all this noise. And I had the machine turned off. All the trucks were turned off. So all of a sudden we're just, we're taking a minute enjoying. Some Vietnam, some scenery was beautiful over the rice paddies, and some of that, we call them wetlands areas. And then, it was really visual. Nice scenery, I guess you'd say, just for that moment in time that you could stop and enjoy. And all of a sudden we hear all this noise coming, and I said, well, machine's off, where's all this noise coming from? Well, apparently there was a group of Marines on 10 trucks armed to the teeth with 2 helicopters protecting them, and they were going to the war. There was a problem. I had an 8-foot hole cut into the road. Now here comes the war, and so all of a sudden there's an officer comes driving up in a Jeep, and we're looking at the helicopters are coming around us, and we're waving at the helicopters. We're Seabees, and they see what we're doing, so the helicopter and the guy's going like this, what are you doing? I said, well, we're working, So all of a sudden up comes an officer, what the hell are you doing? He says, well, he said, nobody told you we were going to be out here, so it was a miscommunication. So this was a detachment of Marines going to the war somewhere that were very important, and this was an immediate need that they get across. So I told them, I said, we can't fix this in 2 minutes. I said, but what I can do is I won't put the pipe in. I'll fill it back in, but it's not compacted. So I told him, I said, I'll get behind each truck and push the truck across with the bulldozer because the dirt is all soft. These were heavy trucks. They're probably maybe 25 Marines all armed to the teeth And here we are with, shorts and no shirt on, and we're in the middle of nowhere doing this job. So what happened is I'd pull the bulldozer off to the side a little, they'd pull the first truck by me, and then I'd get the bulldozer and just literally push them through the soft dirt up and all, and then these Marines are the same way, they're just looking, shaking their head, and then we're sitting, and we're in the middle of nowhere.
Was that at night?
No, that was during the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there were, some fond memories and some not so fond memories.
Okay.
That's one that, you got to get across. This is how it's going to happen. The guy said, well, you might break the truck. I said, well, I'm going to try not to break the truck, but if you want to get across, this is how you're going to get across. So,
It's the only way.
but it worked out okay. And the guys in the choppers were sitting there shaking. So we didn't really carry any, we didn't have any identification and wore no collar devices. We wore Marine fatigues. And when we were going into an area, the people in the area were told that there's people coming in to do something, don't go near them, leave them alone. So it's similar that if you went up and you give the biggest guy in the world a stick and tell him to go hit that bee's nest, and then they come out at you, that's what ours was. So sometimes we repelled people that bothered us, and sometimes we stayed with the Marines. I had a little D2 bulldozer. There's a picture of, it had the double-plated Chinook helicopter, I think it's called. And they would pick that up and drop that into a little hilltop somewhere and then carry me on another chopper, and then I'd do a job, and again, we're like in the middle of nowhere. But it was something for the Marines. We're going to occupy that hill the next day, and what we do is we drop in and dig a bunker, all right? A couple of guys would blow trees, and we put the trees over the top and then try to make a secure area just so they could get in and then build a fire base of different sizes. It would be, that's how fire bases were born.
Oh.
They don't start just like you see the fire base pictures where there's, it's like half a city. They don't start like that. Mm. They would start with just one little contingent, and then they would grow that out.
Mm-hmm. And what about 5 o'clock? You weren't allowed on the roads anymore?
No.
When it got dark?
Well, some of the places they'd drop us in with the helicopters, there were no roads.
No, I mean what you said earlier when we were seeing
that was
yeah.
Bridge 13, was south of Chulai. And every time we built it, the Gooks would blow it up, because apparently they didn't want us to get, the military to get into their area. So the last time we had quite a few military people guarding the bridge, and we were able to rebuild it before they could blow it up. And they sent a brand new crane down, truck crane, to finish the job because they blew the other one up. And we were going to bring that. There was a Rock Marine base. Korean Marines were a good group, about 4 miles up Route 1. So we said, okay, well, we'll take this crane and we'll run it back to the Marine base. Well, by the time we got done, you couldn't go on the road. They'd shut Route 1 down at like 5 o'clock, I think it was. So you couldn't be on the road. So we had to leave that. So they just get in a truck and ride up to, we stayed at the Rock Marine base, but we left the new crane, and when we come back the next day, their satchel charge didn't go off to blow the bridge up, but they put one on a new crane and just blew it out to smithereens. So that was Bridge 13, we called it. Mm-hmm. There were areas where, the VC didn't want you in their areas, and when you try to build something heavy. There's a project book I'll bring to you. We built in Tamkey, we built a 140-bed hospital.
How do you spell that?
I think it's Tamky. We built a 130-bed hospital. We had CB Masons were actually making the block out of whatever material they had to work with, and then and actually building it all on a block. There was another one there, Fubai. We had flew us up to Fubai, and we built a heliport out of Marshall Manning. Marshall Manning was born out of World War II. It was heavy steel plates, like a mat, They were about maybe about 3 feet wide and about maybe 6 feet long, and they connected together. So you could make a small plane could take off on them, but helicopters, it was great for a helicopter to land on. And in Fubai, I think we built barracks in Fubai, so some Marines say, when they hear you in Fubai, oh, you guys built my barracks there, So a lot of times, they would take us, and we had an area, I think we were like 45-mile radius around Chulai that we worked in. And a lot of times we didn't really know, I can't remember the names a lot of times. Quang Nai was south of us. Quang Nai was a town maybe, their business district was maybe 2 blocks long and then a half a block on each side, and that was a town. I think the Army had some installation there because we found some ARVNs, we watched them dropping off artillery shells, and the VC would come at night and pick them up.
Wow.
So we grabbed 3 of them and brought them into Quang Nai, and military took them over.
The VC or the ARVNs?
They were ARVNs. They came in an ARVN 5-ton truck, and then we saw them. They were about maybe a quarter mile away from where we were working our Route 1. There was nothing else out there, so we saw them throwing stuff off. And then they took off and went the other way, so we didn't pay attention. But when they were gone, we went down and looked, and they were artillery shells. In Vietnam, the VC would make anti-tank mines out of artillery shells. Another CB friend of mine I went in with, he was at a different battalion, but we went into CBs together. He was blown off his bulldozer by one. Lost his hearing. In those days, they didn't call it TBI. So anything, sometimes the ARVN were VC, sometimes they were okay, and you never really knew who was who. On your bases, if we'd be working on a base, they always had gooks picking papers up and doing, cutting bushes or something. And you'd see one of them just walking, and he was pacing the different buildings from where it was. And as soon as we would see that, we'd call whoever was in charge of the base and say, that's him, because that's how they walked mortars in. They would know the distance to the front of the base. And then once they knew the distance to where the CO's headquarters was, things like that, that's how they were able to aim their armament against them.
I've heard of that. But you talked earlier about when you're working somewhere and it's far from your home base, that you were welcome at any base because you had to just hurry up and get your equipment somewhere before the road was closed.
Well, we were welcomed in any base because we built projects for all the different services that were in Vietnam. Chulai, I think it was MACV was the Marine Air Command, that they were Marine pilots flying the jets. We built hangars for them. And during TED of '68, we built bomb dumps on the end of the runway in Chulai, and I think it was about might have been 2 acres in the center of it. We took earth movers and built sand walls around it and then sprayed heavy asphalt on top of it, liquid asphalt to hold it so the rains couldn't wash the sand away. And then they would bring in from the sand ramps, they would load on armament, the bombs for the planes. So I think there was about maybe 2.5 acres in each one of these full of bombs. And during TED of '68, they brought us all back to main camp once it started really happening. And then the gooks were shooting rockets and mortars from that hill across. And they got something, a rocket or a mortar, into that one bomb dump. And it blew up, looked like a quarter mile high, looked like an atom bomb gone off, all in flame. And to this day, I only met one other person that was there at that time. He was, I was up in group at Alliance Hospital. And so in 45 years, I've only met one other person who saw that. And both sides stopped. It was like the finale of the fireworks, coming both ways. And both sides stopped because both sides didn't know who threw that. But that bomb dump blew that up and knocked the hangars we built for the Marine jets. Blew those down the runway, so they called us out with a couple of these large wheeled rough terrain forklifts. They were like 15, 20 ton capacity forklifts, huge things. And we ran down the runway with them and cleared the debris from those hangars off the runway while the planes were trying to land. And the Gooks are still shooting.
How did all the heavy equipment get there? By ship?
Yeah, actually, it's an interesting point that we were well equipped, all different, any type of equipment. And what happened was whether the Gooks would blow it up at night if we weren't able to bring it back or something would break. So one day they called me and said, take the biggest bulldozer you have and just start taking this equipment out of our equipment compound, and the sand ramps were only about maybe 2 blocks away from us. That's where the LSTs were. So I said, what are you going to do? He said, well, there's a barge coming down, and they're going to load this stuff on the barge. I said, oh, must be going to take it to Da Nang and fix it. So anything that was 20% disabled or more, we were going to take and put this on this barge. Because our mechanics, we had in A company was operators and mechanics. So the mechanics problem was keeping up with us fixing our equipment. So we started to do that, and and I said, well, we got to be careful. The guy said, no, just get it down there. We had another bulldozer pushing these pieces of equipment. Somebody's trying to steer a little, had flat tires and stuff. So we get it up on this, we're putting it on this huge barge. The barge was probably 200 feet long, maybe 100 and something feet wide.
Did it sink?
And I said to the Navy guy who was running, I said, you guys, what are you doing? You going to Da Nang with this stuff? The guy laughed. He said, don't you see that crack down the middle? And I said, yeah, there was a crack that ran down the whole middle of that barge. He said, we're going 20 miles offshore and dump it.
What?
That barge name was called the Osage. I have pictures of it. Yeah. And the next ship coming in had all brand new equipment.
Wow.
War was good for the economy, so that was another practical problem that it's why certain people like war, because it makes money for them on the blood of veterans.
Right. I think what my question earlier had to do with was when the roads were closed and it didn't make sense for your crew to travel far to another base. You would just...
We would stay in the camp that we were working for, like you had different camps, different, when I say camp, Chulai was a base to me, a huge base. That was the Marical Division. Actually, the My Lai Massacre came under a Marical Division. But, it was the engine of war. When I speak about that, I mean, it was all right in July. So when we went to other camps, whatever military they were, or sometimes they were Vietnamese that we built things for, we had CB teams that our doctors and dentists would go out, and corpsmen would go out and treat people in villages. Sometimes they would send us out with equipment to dig some drainage ditches for them. So we worked for many different factions of it. But the point when we were caught and when they closed the road, Route 1, at night the Gooks were mining. Mm-hmm. So the next morning you would have to wait till the minesweepers went down and did the best job that they could to make sure. In those days you had to actually run over a mine or something that's going to injure you. Whereas it's sad now today people can speed dial a phone and wait till our soldiers go past an IED and they can hurt them that way. So you couldn't go on, you weren't allowed on the road until the minesweepers went down, unless you were in an area where they didn't have minesweepers. So some areas had those and some
Right.
areas didn't, so you just took your chance.
Wow.
Yeah. But in those days, again, we were so focused and pumped up on running on patriotism that,
And for each other, right?
yeah, and it'll never happen to me.
Right. Well, you're young. You live forever.
Yeah.
You're a teenager, practically. How old were you then?
I think I got to Vietnam, I was 20, because I trained for 2 years before I went over.
Right.
And then I think I turned 21 in February 14th of '68. And I was one of the older kids when I was there. And Jimmy Scatier turned 21.
Right. Do you have any other stories that we forgot to say about Vietnam? Before we turned the camera on, we were talking a lot. I want to make sure we get all your stories.
Well, there's different articles I wrote. There's an article that my father cut out of the news that is Bob Hope visited Chu Lai, Vietnam, where I was while I was there, but they wouldn't let us off. They kept us working. And
your dad thought you got to see him?
yeah. So he thought that I got to see him, but I was actually running a crane outside the outdoor theater where he was going to be, and he did give us a wave and a thumbs up as he came past us. That was my experience with Bob Hope.
That's nice. What are your feelings about Bob Hope? How much he did for the servicemen and women?
He did a lot, but he gained a lot. Bob Hope turned out to be one of the wealthiest men in Hollywood. And when you look at the give and take of it, yes, he left his home during the holidays to go and put shows on and whatnot. But I think that helped his career a lot.
Oh, I see.
So. There was a poem I wrote years ago, I can't find it, but one of the lines was, I dealt with veteran suicide. In 1985, I was really having practical problems, and when the veteran suicide issue came up for Vietnam veterans, I was involved, and I got very upset at seeing negative images of Vietnam veterans on TV. One of the ones was Stacy Keach's some kind of show he had, Who's a Vietnam Veteran? And the theme of the show was Vietnam veteran baby stealers that sell them for profit. And my 3 young children were sitting there, and my daughter asked me, Dad, did you do that? And that prompted me to take action from, in those days I was doing very well in business and had connections. What I did, I started a campaign using the fairness doctrine for television, which in those days was only 2, 4, and 7 were the big guns. And I used that against my filed a complaint with the FCC in Washington. My man, Mr. Gross, was the chairman of the FCC in Washington, and I was able to reach him through my connections, and he got a hold of the presidents of those 3 networks. And after them understanding what I could do, I could start a lawsuit against them. We had a conference to my office in northern New Jersey with the 3 vice presidents of the networks and Mr. Gross. And they finally, they said, okay, Mr. Fearon, we understand you have our attention and we don't really want you to go ahead with a lawsuit. Mr. Gross said, what do you want? And I think they all thought I wanted money.
Oh.
And out of the blue, the thought came to me. I said, well, you all see the problem with suicide that this negative image is doing to our veterans, right? I said, I really want you to stop denigrating your customers. Because in those days, when Congress talked about veterans, I forget forget how many million veterans. There were 2.3 Vietnam-era veterans, and then there was a World War II group. And when Congress would speak about them, they multiply that by a factor of 4 for their immediate sphere of influence for their family. But when you go to the outer families, you can see the size of the voting block. So basically, by me using that phrase to them, they understood that they were really hurting their customers. And right after that, you had 2 shows came on a weekly basis. One was China Beach, and one was Platoon, which I guess they gave a better description of what the veteran was doing or had done in Vietnam. And I like to think that it helped minimize the suicide issue for a lot of people. Unfortunately, now that's raised its ugly head again with the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. But in Vietnam days after that, they didn't have a lot of the support services for dealing with PTSD and people that were going to take their lives.
Right. You mentioned your dad mailed you some articles. Do we want to talk about this one?
Yeah, this was, the article was done with, shows a CB. This could have been me in another project, but it shows a CB on a bulldozer and he's starting to clear a road. There's a famous cartoon from Reader's Digest, I think in 1953. There is a nice island out in the Pacific, and it shows a bunch of CBs sitting on the beach, and there's a road goes cut through the palm trees, and we have a little sign saying, "Welcome Marines." But this article just came, it was part of the Bob Hope article of that time. That'd be, I think it said 68 of when I was in Chulai. It was interesting that my father found it. But it depicts what CBs do.
It's got the emblem, the symbol that's on your hat,
Yes.
too.
Ours is a little CB there, and we have a machine gun in one, and a wrench in the other, and a hammer in the other, because all construction trades were covered by CBs. Some had 2 or 3 different trades.
Do you want to talk about the watchfires? I don't have a date on this or where it was published.
One of the things that when I was in having my problems in the 85 era, I met a Army Ranger in Washington when I was down there dealing with the veteran suicide issue. And he asked me, he saw I had a little CB pin on it. He asked me if I could build him a fire. So I said, "Well, where are you at?" He said, "I'm up by the Tappan Zee Bridge." And, you know, "How big do you want to build it?" I said, "We can build anything and blow it up." So, I said, can you get wood? So it turns out they're in Orange and Rockland County, and there was a large contingent of veterans there. And at the town of Piermont, New York, there is literally was a wooden pier that most of the people that debarked from the area for World War II, I forget 700,000 men debarked from this wooden pier. They went through Camp Shanks up on the western shore, and then debarked on ferry boats that took them to the troop ships in the harbor. And then many didn't return from World War II. So this is where my friend Jerry Donnellan wanted to build a so-called watchfire. It's likened to the beacon fires of George Washington days of how they communicated. And because of my experience with heavy equipment, and at that time I was doing international salvage work, cutting down oil refineries while they were running. It gives it another bit of flavor. But I was able to take complete tractor-trailer loads of logs, some 4 feet in diameter and 30 feet long, and build a fire out of it. And we built it 50 feet by 50 feet high.
What was it on?
Well, now the old wooden pier is pretty much dilapidated, so the Army Corps of Engineers built a stone pier that goes all the way out a mile into the middle of the Hudson River. So we build that fire on the end of the pier there, and we look right at the middle of the Tappan Zee Bridge when we're doing that. And that was in 1987, I think we built the first one. And because of the large contingent of World War II and Korean veterans there, we actually light the fire 001 of May 30th, which is the traditional Memorial Day, rather than what we call the Sale Day, when the government made it a Friday or a Monday so everybody could have beer and hot dogs. So to this day, I think this was our 28th or 29th year, it's getting a little fuzzy, that we build this fire. And we have, some years we have maybe 5 or 6, 7 more fires all on the hilltops along the river. And we have, we'll have a couple National Guard helicopters come and fly over the fire while we're lighting it. It's not a party, it's a solemn ceremony. We have a speaker just explains to the crowd why we're there, and we blow taps and then light the fire. And if you've ever experienced the mesmerization of a small fire in your fireplace, you can you can picture one with 80-foot flames. But that's something that has brought out a lot of different veterans. There are shut-in veterans, and
Of course.
they will. That's one of the things they'll come out for.
And the National Guard helped secure the lumber?
Well, we get that from the loggers in the area. There's still a lot of woodland up in that area. So basically, we don't get the wood that can be cut into nice firewood chunks. So we get all the remnants. So some of these things are 3 and 4 tons. And you have to be very careful. And everything's not in the same shape and the same weight. So you have to be an expert on how to pick it up and get it up onto the pile, and that was my forte.
And how would you get it there through the stone pier?
Yeah, that stone pier can take any weight, any heavy weight on it, because it was built very well. The old wooden pier now is dilapidated, and that probably only took small trucks that took the guys out for World War II to the end of that pier, which was close to the end of this pier. So they could get on it. The ferry boats had a deep draft, but the troop ships had deeper and they couldn't make it up the river. So that's how they got down there. But they would bring it down, the loggers would bring it down in logging trucks and set it there, and then we would build the fire. But that's something that if you Google up beacon fires, that's how they signaled each other in George Washington days. The first fire was built in Summit, New Jersey on Beacon Hill. Now it's the Beacon Hill Club. And you could see from that hill, you can see right into the Newark Bay. So when the bad guys would come into the Newark Bay, back in Revolutionary War, they would light that fire, and you can see George Washington's headquarters in Morristown, and then they would light more fires all the way out through West Jersey. And the more fires that were lit, the more men came to the fight. Hobart Gap is in Summit, New Jersey, and that was a natural gap between 2 large hills that made it easy to defend against the intruders.
Oh, so that's where most of the fighting took place?
Yeah, you had, I'm told I'm not that good at the history of it, but there were Battle of Short Hills, Battle of Union, New Jersey, and those were where, the Newark Bay, they'd come into the Newark Bay or into New York Harbor, but New York Harbor was heavily defended, so Newark Bay wasn't as defended, so they'd try to jump ship Newark Bay and then come up to get a foothold, but that's where Washington's army would stop them. That was the first line of defense.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Very interesting. Do you have any other stories about your time in service? You also served for another couple years, right?
Yeah, those were basically when I came back because of what I did in Vietnam. They gave me E5 designation, which is equal to sergeant. I was, again, because I was proficient at heavy equipment and projects, I got a lot more done than I really didn't have to do. And when I came back, they put me in charge of 21st Regimental Dispatcher. I had like 600 pieces of equipment. And every day I would get maybe 60 or 70 men show up at my office door, and I'd have to look at a list of projects and understand their ability with equipment, and then give them a piece of equipment and assign them to a project. This was the regiment, the battalions are under the regiment umbrella, and when your battalion is back in stateside, you would have different projects around the base or sometimes out in a civilian world. So naturally heavy equipment and different types of equipment is very important to that. So you'd have to talk to a fellow for 2 minutes and see, all right, you know how to run this piece of equipment, okay, take this, go with this guy and do their project. So that was something that
Where was your office?
That was in back in Davisville.
Right.
That was when we went back to Davisville to resupply and get some R&R and
And you found out you didn't have to have a second tour?
well, just before, what happened was because of my little seat of authority, I had everybody's Jeeps. Jeeps were like the vehicle of choice in Davisville, and I had everybody's Jeeps. You had to come to me to get a pass to go get gas, or it's called a trip ticket, to actually be in that Jeep. So once I learned, you know, it seemed you get a little fiefdom. So the headquarters company, they had like 5 Jeeps. They didn't have to have 5 Jeeps, but you know, that enabled me to get some information about different things if I wanted it, but I never profited off of any of it. So one day, one of the fellows, he signed a Jeep, he came to me to get the Jeep ticket signed, and he said, Terry, he said, you know, you're getting out. I said, what do you mean? I said, I got another 2 or 3 years to go. He said, no. He said, you're on the list. They're cutting like a whole mess of us, right? I said, get out. So he didn't have the list. He couldn't take it out. So I went to headquarters company under the guise of going to sign the tickets for that. And he showed me the list, and I'm on the list. And I thought to myself, I said, well, you know, I can cancel and I can stay, but at that time, now we're watching TV, the protesters, and then you had veterans, Vietnam veterans against the war, and you know, I'm going on, and I'm sitting there thinking, and I had probably 3 very near misses that I can account for that I knew about. And
while you were overseas?
Yeah, when I was in Vietnam. So while I'm sitting there thinking, you know,
we should talk about those.
Well, there's one time on a road grader, we're down in, you take a road grader, they still do it on the back country roads now, county roads. And basically you take a road grader and you put the moldboard, it's called, has a large blade underneath it, and you pull the dirt and stone that has been pushed off the road back up onto the road to maintain the road. Otherwise you get big holes and stuff. So while I'm doing that, they always give me a shotgun rider. And all of a sudden, as I'm looking down, when you run into the road grader is one of the hardest pieces of equipment to operate. Only thing harder is a crane. And with the road grader, because there's about 15 levers you have to be in control of. In those days, they're not all, now I guess everything's computerized, it's a lot easier. In those days, it wasn't so easy to operate. You had to be ahead of it all the time. And as I'm looking down, you had to know the dirt that's coming across the board and where you're going and the pitch of the wheels and the pitch of the machine and the speed of the machine and everything. And all of a sudden I see the dirt is flying up at me. Well, someone had the range with a automatic weapon, but he didn't. He had the aim, but he didn't have and he was close on the range. But as the round comes out, it drops. and where I was maybe 3 feet down to the to the blade. So he was only 3 feet low from where I was and trying to take me out. So as soon as I saw that, there's 2 big levers. There's one kicks it into high gear and 2 big levers to pick the board up. I kicked it into high gear and I yell at the shotgun rider, "Shoot." He said, "Where?" I said, "I don't know, but it's coming from somewhere and you better duck too." So once I picked that up, the thing goes into high gear. Well, this has those big tires, like 4-foot high tires, and now you're on an old dirt road and we're like literally coming off the ground like 3 feet going down the road and trying to hide at the same time.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so that was, one. And then another time a fella got shot like right next to me in a truck. And, it was just that close. And then when you realize there was, so we saw one fella get shot. And, I was brought up Roman Catholic. And I guess we were religious up to that point, and then we all went over and prayed over him. When you find out that prayer doesn't bring somebody back that's just been killed, you lose something there. So that's why a statement earlier when I said, everybody's religion, and it's difficult. But I lost my faith in Vietnam. Whatever I thought that was there. I also lost my childhood sweetheart when I came back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. My Mary Ann Lauber, we were from 12 to 17 years old. We were like the item. I was a horse stables, Watchung Stables with 70 head of horses, and I was a stable hand, and she was riding horses. So, and we planned to get married and went through high school, and I went to Vietnam. I came back with my issues, and she went to college. So Vietnam, I got a letter that says she was having so much fun at college and whatnot. Didn't know if she'd be there when I got back. They call it a Dear John letter. Because I guess now she's at college and seeing the protesters all going, and this is your guy is a war veteran here, so I think that turned her head. And then when I did come back and we got back together, it was like I was a totally different person. And it wasn't going to work out, so she married her boyfriend that she had up in college. Mm-hmm. Still lives in Rhode Island to this day, I believe. But yeah. So I guess
she went to college in Rhode Island? Where you were based out of?
I forget the name of the college there. But before she was going to college, while I was in training in Davisville. And it wasn't URI, it was the other college. I'll think of it in a minute. But it was in town, and it was had a 10-story building. And at that time, we were still talking, communicating, and dating a little bit whenever I could get out of the base. So we're going to go the next day. That's it. They gave us orders. So I called up and said, "I'd like to see you. If I could just, kiss you, hug you goodbye." So when I got there, by the time I was able to leave the base, I got there, it was night. They had closed the dorms. You had to be a student to get in. So I adapted and overcame. I climbed the fire escape and got in through one of the halls and found a room, and people were all they were all women at the time, And I said, "You got to help me find her. I'm leaving tomorrow." Yeah, that was like probably the last time that it was a romantic thing. Yeah. Oh. And then with that, one of the, I forget what they call them now, the college police came up and they tried to arrest me. But I fought them off, got back down at the fire escape, and was gone. Yeah. But I guess that bothered me because that kind of, when you're just a nice young kid going up and you feel that, everything's okay, and she was a beautiful person, intelligent, and we had similar likes and whatnot. And then all of a sudden they come back a total person, and you look, and that's just wasn't going to happen. So what happened to us with PTSD is that you never really let anyone now in your inner circle. Everything's at arm's length. Even my children are at arm's length. You know, it's and they tell me that comes from you know, in war you get too close to someone and then they're gone, and it hurts more. But that still holds true to this day. I only have probably 3 close people that I talk to. And, you know, 2 of them are 2 Marines and another Special Forces. And it's funny, they say the same thing.